We're following breaking news out of Israel where Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is asking for forgiveness, or he said he asked forgiveness from families whose family members died as hostages in Gaza. And he's also vowing to punish Hamas after the bodies of those 6 hostages were recovered from the Gaza Strip. He spoke moments ago as another day of mass protests and a general labor strike intensify the pressure on Netanyahu to finally get a hostage deal done.
Israel is not going to ignore this massacre. The Hamas will pay a heavy price for this, a very heavy price. In the war against the evil axis, in this specific war against Hamas.
Now, before Netanyahu spoke to his grieving country, President Biden accused the prime minister of not doing enough to secure a ceasefire deal as he arrived at the White House to meet with his hostage negotiating team. Back in Israel, mourners gathered for the funeral of slain Israeli-American hostage Hersh Goldberg Polin. The 23-year-old was among those expected to be released in the first phase of a ceasefire deal, according to U.S. and Israeli officials. CNN's Nick Robertson is joining us now from Tel Aviv. Nick, how is the crowd reacting to Netanyahu's remarks after what has just been such an incredibly sad few days?
You know, I think it's going to be hard for a lot of people to take this very rare act of contrition by the Prime Minister, to take it at face value. He spent the vast majority of this press conference, stepping away from his lectern, picking up a pointer and trying to sort of explain on a map of Gaza why he refuses to change his sticking point on keeping troops along the border between Gaza and Egypt, the so-called Philadelphia corridor. He spent a huge amount of time with graphics showing how Hamas was using that border, tunnels under it, to bring weapons into Israel and weapons into Gaza, rather, and unless troops remain along there, he said that Hamas will do that again. So this was the Prime Minister, on one hand, offering some solace to those families, but the real solace that the families are looking for, that the people on the streets here are looking for, is a change of fundamental position. And he offered up the exact opposite. He offered up a doubling down of his current position. So I don't think this is going to take people off the streets by any means. It will give them a renewed vigor to maintain their calls for him to either step down, have an election, or at least get the hostages back.
All right, we'll be watching. I mean, these hundreds of thousands of people taking to the streets just give you a sense of what pressure he is facing from the public there in Israel. Nick, thank you for that live report from Tel Aviv. Pamela?
Let's talk more about these developments with retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton. He is a CNN military analyst. Great to see you. So, as we just heard it laid out there, Netanyahu today vowing to punish Hamas for what they did to the hostages. From a military standpoint, what would that look like beyond what we're already seeing from Israel?
Yeah, Pamela, it's hard to really see if there's any difference. And as Nick was pointing out in his report, there is really very little difference from what the Israelis have done before and what the Prime Minister outlined in his speech just now. He did make a strong case for keeping Israeli presence in the Philadelphia corridor. That's the area between Gaza and Egypt, that border area. And basically what he was saying is, let's keep this area under Israeli control so that no weapons, no money, no munitions, no people can go back and forth. Those are valid military points. However, the other military point that is really in contrast to this is that if you don't move out of the Philadelphia corridor, at least temporarily, then there's probably no way that there's going to be a peace agreement or a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas.
And I think that's key, because this has really been the sticking point, right, of a potential deal, a ceasefire deal, and a return of the hostages. And so you heard in the wake of these 6 hostages being killed, Netanyahu defending his position, doubling down on why that corridor is so important. And President Biden just saying today that Netanyahu isn't doing enough to bring a ceasefire deal across the finish line. How might a comment like that impact ceasefire talks?
Yeah, it could certainly force the Israelis into a more hardened position, but it could also, on the other hand, pressure them to loosen to their position. But with the prime minister's speech right now, it does seem that the Israelis, at least the top level of the Israeli government, is going in for a much more hard position in this particular case. Hamas has basically said that they're not going to do a deal unless the Israelis leave. The Israeli military and the intelligence services have said that they can control the Philadelphia corridor enough, even without troops being present, that they would be willing to take the risk to allow Israeli troops to leave in order to get the hostages back. So basically what Netanyahu is doing is he's going against his senior military and intelligence advisors, and that is really where the big impasse within the Israeli government lies, and that will have a huge impact on the negotiations.
So tactically then, tell us a little bit more about this position from Netanyahu, his insistence of keeping these troops in the Philadelphia corridor during these ceasefire talks. Why? Tell us a little bit more about why he thinks that is so important.
So what he sees is that this is the major route in for all kinds of weapons to come in. And this is how Iran, using various intermediaries that go through Egypt, with the Egyptian authorities in some cases turning a blind eye toward the transaction, Iran and other suppliers of weapons can provide weapons through the Philadelphia corridor, through those tunnels, into Gaza. So this is a very well organized effort on the part of Hamas and its, in essence, its co-conspirators, if you will. And that really makes for a difficult situation for the Israeli military, for the IDF. And from a tactical perspective, what Netanyahu is afraid of is that this will continue to be a place in which all these arms flow through this area without any real control by the Israelis or by anybody else. And he doesn't think that not having boots on the ground, in essence, will stop this flow of weapons and personnel as well as money.
Do you think a ceasefire deal is the best option right now to save the lives of the remaining hostages?
Well, I don't know how realistic a ceasefire deal is right now, Pamela, but I think it is the best option because the way in which Hamas is holding these hostages seems to be in a very tightly controlled area. And because of that, it's really difficult for the Israeli forces to mount hostage rescue operations at this particular moment in time. And of course, as we saw with the deaths of the 6 hostages just recently, that creates the real problem here. The hostages are basically pawns in all of this. And unfortunately, if the ceasefire deal is not reached, then their lives continue to be at risk at this point.
All right, Colonel Cedric Leighton, thank you.